You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
Welcome to Scuderia F1, the podcast that's always up to speed with the latest Formula One news. Follow us on Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod and subscribe to the show on iTunes and Stitcher. Now, here are your hosts, Mark Dailey and Kevin Laramée.
Hey everybody, what is up? Welcome to the podcast that is always up to speed with Formula One. Mark Dailey here, welcoming you to the very last day of January 2019. Hard to believe that the first month of the year is already out of the way. It doesn't seem like that long ago we were sitting down to celebrate Christmas and New Year's, and this month has really flown by. Honestly, I can't believe it. But as they say in Latin, tempus fugit, time flies, and it certainly does. But well, with the passing of the first month of the year, that means we are a lot closer to the start of the Formula One season. And let's start there this week, and with the news that Formula One will, for the very first time, hold a season launch event with all the teams and drivers at Federation Square in Melbourne on Wednesday, March 13th. It's the very first time they've done something like that. I mean, they've done a couple of these Formula One live events over the past couple of years in different European cities, so definitely very cool. Obviously, being in Canada, I'm not going to be able to make it, but I guess we can all be there in spirit, or at least via YouTube or the Formula One official website. But it was kind of cool a couple of years ago. Just a little anecdote and a little side story here. A friend of ours was actually in Melbourne in 2017 when the Grand Prix was going on. And although we weren't able to obviously be there ourselves, she brought back a lot of Formula One swag for us, which was pretty cool. And when she asked, well, what do you want me to bring you back? And I thought, well, if you're in Australia, you're at the Australian Grand Prix, or at least in the gift shop. I thought the best way to mark that one was by getting a Daniel Ricciardo cap. So definitely a collector's item now, because he'll be wearing the gold and black of Renault this year, but definitely a cool little memento. And of course, that's not only the one thing that's going on. There's plenty of things coming up. What with tomorrow being the first day of February, that means that we're moving into what is a very important month in the Formula One calendar, outside of the racing, obviously. And it's the time when all the teams launch and release their new cars, and they head off to preseason testing at Circuit de Catalunya in Barcelona. But we're now just only about 10 days away from the first launch of the year, and that kicks off on February 11th with Toro Rosso, and followed up by most of the other teams, ending with Sauber at February 18th. And you have Ferrari and Mercedes and McLaren. The only one that I don't see in there right now is Williams, but who knows? I don't know how much of a fanfare they're going to get unless they can really turn things around. But hey, now that's a little bit mean. Anyways, not only are we going to see the car launches coming up over the next couple of weeks, February 18th to the 21st marks the first preseason test in Barcelona, and then they have about a 4 or 5 day break, and then they head off to the second round of preseason testing from February 26th to March 1st, and then after that it's only 2 weeks until the start of the season. So even though it seems like a very, very long time since we last saw Formula One in action at Abu Dhabi at Yas Marina at the end of November, the end is, well, it's not in sight, but there is a little faint speck on the horizon that marks that Formula One is definitely just about to come back. Anyways, looking at some of the news that's been out there this week, 2016 Formula One World Champion Nico Rosberg has offered a bit of advice to Sebastian Vettel and Valtteri Bottas on how to beat Lewis Hamilton this year. Now, he didn't really come out and tell them exactly what Lewis's Achilles heel is, but he did say that he believes that there's obviously a lot of pressure on Sebastian Vettel, and he believes that Vettel's really feeling the pressure, because not only does he have the pressure from within his team and from within himself driving for Ferrari, you obviously have the pressure of an entire nation. The entire country of Italy is wanting you to win and bring home Formula One glory. And obviously that has got to be a big responsibility for whoever that is. But he feels that Vettel personally needs to improve, and the team Ferrari also has to improve as well. And this is no big secret. We've talked about it before, that that Ferrari and Vettel definitely probably let that both world championships get away from them last year. So I think that I think he's basically saying that if he can get his head straight and the team supports him and they make the decisions that they need to make, I think that's going to go a long way to helping mount a serious challenge against Lewis Hamilton. I mean, you got to have your head straight if you're going to come up against Lewis. Not only is he very, very quick, and he's always got a very, very good car. I mean, Mercedes obviously has been one of the best car in Formula One over the past several years. He's also mentally tough. So if you can't come to that sort of level, and I think that Nico came kind of close. Obviously, he did win that 2016 World Championship, but it really took a lot out of him. I mean, he was only world champion for less than a week before he decided to pull the plug when I guess he just must have sat back and thought, okay, well, I won a world championship. It's taken me this many years. It's cost this much in dedication and personal sacrifice. Am I willing to do it again and go head to head with Lewis Hamilton or Sebastian Vettel or anybody else, especially Lewis? I mean, there was always going to be that competition within Mercedes and two very, very good drivers. And Rosberg at sometimes was pretty, let's give him some credit, was able to come close to the level that Hamilton is at. So if you can get close to that on a sort of an even par on the mental game, that's going to go a long way with fighting with Lewis Hamilton. But then Valtteri Bottas, of course, he was saying that he's been. Well, it's easy to say. He's basically saying with the new season, he has a better chance to establish himself in a stronger position. And what he said, what I thought was kind of interesting, he said by really annoying Lewis a lot. And I don't know what exactly he means by that, but last year, Bottas obviously had a subpar season. The first year he was at Mercedes was really about, I think, proving himself that he should be there, being Rosberg's replacement, and he did well. I mean, he's won a couple of races since he's been there. He was more of the agreeable teammate compared to the toxic relationship that Hamilton and Rosberg had that just worsened each and every year as the two were partners at Mercedes. I mean, how many times did we see during that partnership would it actually went really bad, and we had the bigwigs, Toto Wolff or Niki Lauda, saying that they would not hesitate to basically fire one of those guys if it actually came to that, because they felt that the relationship that both of those guys had with each other was just detrimental to the entire team and what they were trying to achieve, regardless if they were winning races. They just felt that the dynamic between those two guys was just too much. There's too much friction, and it was a real problem. Bottas, obviously, completely different situation between him and Lewis Hamilton, and last year he really struggled. It's kind of course, hindsight is 2020, and of course it's easy to say, well, when he lost that race that he was leading in Baku, that was obviously a bit of a turning point in the season, but it was really unfortunate. I mean, he ran over that debris that gave him a puncture late in the race, and then he was just not able to recover from that. And of course, later in the year, when Lewis was really looking to lock down that championship, when it was basically academically his, by the time they got to Russia, and then there was the whole team orders thing, even though that Bottas was leading there, and of course he's won at that race before, and he had to pull over for his teammate, and then he had the mechanical failure in Austria while he was leading. Well, that's when they had the first double DNF since 1955 due to mechanical reasons or whatever. But I do agree that with Rosberg, that if the conditions are right and Bottas has a good car, I think that he could win some races again. And I think that he could, well, I don't know about annoy Lewis. That's, like I say, I still think that's a bit of an odd situation, or odd comment from Nico Rosberg. But Bottas, I think he's obviously had to go away from the season this past year and just kind of over the past couple of months get his head in the right place, the right space, if you want to call it that. But he was at the Arctic Lapland Rally in Finland this past weekend. He won a stage and he finished fifth overall, and I think that's a really, really good achievement. And I think we should give him a lot of respect for him taking part in this and doing as well as he did. And who knows? Maybe that's just something that he can just take, put in under his belt, and really move forward and take that as a bit of a confidence booster going into the season. I mean, the pressure's already on. I believe that his contract is up at the end of this year, and Total Wolff even said a couple of weeks ago, pardon me, that he has to perform on a par or the same level as Lewis Hamilton if he wants to come back for next year. I mean, Mercedes, of course, there's going to be no shortage of guys that would want to take that second seat at Mercedes. I mean, you have Esteban Ocon, who's one of their reserve driver and simulator driver, who's out of a drive at Force India. And when the music stopped playing in the silly season last year, he was the one guy that was left without a drive. So they are tapping him for great things in the future. And if you go back a couple of months in F1 Racing Magazine, there was a story about Ocon and how they really feel about him. That he's got all the talents and the attributes to be a very successful driver in Formula One. So by the time we get to the end of 2019, Valtteri would have had 3 full years with Mercedes. And who knows, we could see, I think the first half of the year is going to be very, very crucial, because a lot of the decisions for the drivers for the coming years, it seems a silly season starts earlier each and every year. And if he struggles in the first half of the season, who knows, that might be enough to really tip the scales away or in the favor of Mercedes making a replacement there. So he's really going to have to find whatever competitive advantage he can to not only continue the role that he had with Mercedes, but he's got to find more than just scoring points and helping them in the Constructors' Championship. He's really going to have to do well and really find a way to win races and do as well as he can to really make a case for himself to stay there for 2020 and beyond. And now this is an interesting one. There's been no shortage of comments and discussion ahead of the new season. Jenson Button, who's obviously another former Formula One world champion, now is a pundit on Sky in the UK, believes that new signing at Ferrari Charles Leclerc could force Sebastian Vettel into what Jens is calling a tough decision over his Formula One future. And I still maintain that I think the situation at Ferrari this year is going to be fascinating to watch. A couple of years ago, we saw it in 2014 with Daniel Ricciardo and Sebastian Vettel when he was in his last year at Red Bull before moving to Ferrari. He was actually outperformed, and Daniel Ricciardo in his first year in the senior Red Bull team outperformed him and scored more points than Sebastian Vettel. And then, of course, he goes on, signs a big lucrative contract with Ferrari and trying to bring the glory back, obviously. And it's been a bit of a project at Ferrari, to say the least. I mean, they've increased steadily each and every year over the past couple of years, and they've been in the position the past 2 years at least to be challenging Mercedes and winning races. And they really had a legit shot to win it all last year, and it just we don't need to go down that rabbit hole again, but it certainly is. If they can maintain this same trajectory, that they should be challenging Mercedes again this year. And it'll be fascinating to watch to see how that dynamic unfolds between Leclerc and Sebastian in Ferrari this year. Over the past several years, I think that Sebastian, I think to a certain degree, I think he was a little bit too comfortable, whether he wants to admit that or not, because he was just naturally a little bit faster than Kimi Räikkönen, and Kimi was just not able to really push him or really, at times, I think, really do the job that he needed to do at Ferrari. Like we've seen other guys, say Bottas, who we were just talking about a couple of minutes ago, was doing the same job that at Mercedes and really helping to score as many points and really do the job that he needs to do to help them win. And of course, he did a phenomenal job, and of course that led to that infamous wingman comment Toto Wolff made after the Hungarian Grand Prix last year, when Ferrari just messed up Sebastian's pit stop just enough. They just couldn't get him out in time, and he came out of the pits just behind Valtteri Bottas. And, the Hungaroring is impossible to pass on, basically. And by the time Vettel was eventually able to get past Bottas, it was over and done with. He was never going to catch Lewis Hamilton at the front, but he did what he needed to do. He ran interference, basically, and just let Hamilton just drive off into the distance. And that is something that a situation we hadn't really seen too much of over the past several years with Vettel and Raikkonen. They were never really able to deliver that 1-2 punch. But now, of course, Kimi, he did have a bit of a renaissance at the end of last year, of course, winning in Austin at the end of the year. And now he's off to Sauber. But Leclerc, that could be really interesting to see that, the young up-and-comer really trying to establish himself. And Jenson goes on to talk about just how that a guy like Charles, like just the way that he is as a person and just what he's capable of. He said, it could change the dynamic and things within the team. And he said it may actually work a little bit against Sebastian Vettel. So just the whole internal thing at Ferrari, because, it's really flipped upside down last year and in the past year, I should say. And obviously it's sort of, who knows, from the outside, it's a little bit easy to speculate. But of course, a really crucial moment was when Sergio Marchionne, unfortunately, suddenly passed away at the end of last summer. You have those internal changes with I believe it's like 2 or 3 people are basically doing the job that Marchionne used to do himself. And now, of course, they parted way with Maurizio Arrivabene a couple of weeks ago, and they replaced him with Mattia Binotto as the guy who's going to be in charge. You have the after effects, the fallout, if you want to call it that, of a really disappointing 2018. And there's certainly a lot on the line. And it makes me wonder, and this, of course, is just my own speculation, my guess, would Sebastian Vettel, would he consider hanging up his driving gloves at some point? Obviously, I would think that he's done a lot in Formula One. Obviously, he's never going to have to work again at a real job like the rest of us poor suckers here. But certainly, you can see that when things are going right and you're enjoying it, that there still is an attraction to keep in it. Raikkonen, obviously, he's still enjoying Formula One at 39 years old. If he wasn't, why would he, in effect, take a step backwards and go and drive for a midfield team like Sauber? The opportunities that he's going to have to win a race for the next 2 years seem a bit of a stretch, but who knows who's to say if there's some strange weather, or Monaco's always a bit of a roulette game, a bit of a roll of the dice. Anything can and usually does happen there. But if Sebastian gets frustrated or things still don't go his way, and who knows, maybe Ferrari might feel that they want to change, but who they might want to replace Sebastian if it ever came to that, well, that's that's an interesting scenario that could unfold. Could you see Lewis Hamilton going to race for Ferrari? Do you go all in and try and get Max Verstappen out of Red Bull? He's got a contract there for the next couple of years. It would be amazing to see that whole scenario unfold. But I think that if you're Ferrari, obviously you're going to want some continuity, you're going to want some stability, especially after all the upheaval over the past 6 to 8 months, and try and just build, just steady the ship, get back to do what you do best in racing. And hopefully Binotto, he can sort out some of these operational, some of these technical and strategical decisions that were a little bit questionable over the past couple of years that certainly didn't help Sebastian Vettel. And of course, somebody needs to really get Seb focused again. And it's not just all up to him. Last week, we touched on it briefly about Sir Jackie Stewart, 3-time world champion, said that he believes that Formula One drivers are really missing out on not having coaching. And he referred to a lot of other elite athletes and other sports, tennis, for example, how top level tennis players or tennis players at almost every level benefit from coaching. And Formula One is a little bit different, I suppose, motor racing in that way. But certainly, I think last year that Ferrari, even though there were quite a number of mistakes and things that Vettel did wrong himself, which he needs to own, that there were other times that they really didn't put him in the best situation, which undoubtedly just added to the pressure and just did not make it any easier. But interesting words from Jenson Button, and of course, being a guy that was in Formula One for a very, very long time and won a world championship, obviously, and raced for some very big teams. He knows what it's all about. So I think it's interesting to take those words from Jenson and just kind of maybe read between the lines and just kind of get a bit of more insight or a bit more of appreciation what these guys go through, because it can't be easy, obviously. Now, talking about things that aren't easy, the 16 of the 21 race promoters in Formula One had a press release the other day, and this, the official name is the Formula One Promoters Association, or FOPA, and they met in London ahead of the Liberty Media's and Formula One's pre-season meetings, which also are going on about this time. And they just basically they wanted to meet to discuss what they call the situation ahead of the season starting in Australia in several weeks from now. And they released a 3-point statement, and it's interesting to get their 2 cents on it, and they believe that it's not in the long-term interest of the sport that fans are losing free access to content and broadcasting, because there's a lot of places in Europe, for example, I believe Italy, the UK is another one. I don't live there, so I'm just kind of going from what I hear, that it's behind a paywall, it's on subscription TV, it's not available on, I don't even know how you get TV for free nowadays, because here in Canada we get Sky Sports, but we have to watch it on TSN. TSN is a subscription that comes through through our cable, and it's not even part of the normal basic cable package. So for me, I'm used to paying for it, and we've had to do that for a number of years here, but I understand in other parts of the world that is not the case. So I can understand that if you're a Formula One fan and all of a sudden it becomes goes behind that paywall and you are not in the financial position to pay for it, or you don't want to pay for it. Because I have the same thing here. The other thing that I'm big into is soccer, and I do not only am I a soccer fan, but I also do another podcast, and I'm a reporter. So I do a lot of I watch a lot of soccer in addition to a lot of Formula One, and that's one thing I hate. For example, the Champions League, UEFA Champions League, used to be on TSN, used to be on Sportsnet, but now it's on DAZN or whatever it is, and it's just one of these other subscriptions. So it's like, if you want to watch Formula One, you need to subscribe to this channel or to this one or to this service, or you have to stream it online, and it does come to a point where your cup runneth over. So I really do respect the promoters coming out and worrying about people having the access to Formula One if they can't have it, because I've certainly gotten to that point that enough is enough, and there are a number of things that I absolutely have to have and I have to have access to. Formula One is obviously one of those, but I've had to prioritize over the years. I mean, I can pay for all this stuff. I mean, I'm not concerned about that. I mean, I'm very fortunate to have a very good paying job that I go to 9 to 5 and allows me to do a lot of these things, but it's not the same for a lot of people. But I just see to myself, okay, well, I'm going to subscribe to this because I'm going to get a lot of use out of it, but I'm not going to subscribe to this or this or this, whatever it might be, because even though it's really cool, I'm not really going to take advantage of it. I'm not going to use it. And, my interest really isn't there compared to the soccer, compared to the Formula One and the other sports that I enjoy to watch. I mean, I love hockey, ice hockey, for example. I love football. I mean, Super Bowl's this weekend, great time of year, fantastic event. I mean, the Super Bowl is one of the premier sporting events on the entire planet. But at some point, it becomes too much. They also go on to say that they believe there's a lack of clarity on new initiatives in Formula One and a lack of an engagement with promoters on their implementation. And again, I think this is an interesting comment. And again, I mean, these guys are only, 2 years into it now. They bought Formula One out from Ecclestone and then quickly found a way to shove him to one side. And Bernie Ecclestone, of course, sure, he ran the sport with an iron fist for 45 years or something like that. And Formula One wouldn't be what it is now without Bernie Ecclestone. And I mean, that's both a good and a bad thing. I mean, you look at the British Grand Prix, for example, and they decided to exercise that early exit clause to get out of hosting the British Grand Prix. And that's basically because they started out at this baseline of what it was going to cost in fees to host the British Grand Prix. That would basically increase, I think it was 5% each and every year. And at the end of the 17 years or whatever it was that they had written into that contract, it would be up to something like, I think it was 26 million pounds just to host the race in that final year of the contract. And that's a hell of a lot of money. And I can understand why they would be chagrined about that. And you can see, and this kind of segues nicely into the last the last point that they make, and they said that new races should not be introduced to the detriment of existing events, although the association is encouraged by the alternative business models being offered to prospective venues. Now, that is true. They have found different ways to monetize Formula One and different ways to engage the fans, but it's been a bit of a slow process. And I think that Liberty Media is to be commended in some ways, but a lot of the changes that they wanted to make, or they said they were making, it does seem like it is taking a little bit of time, both on and off the track. I mean, they do listen. I mean, if you remember last year, I can remember exactly which race it was. It was about 2/3 of the way of the season. And one of the things I do subscribe to is the Formula One timing app. I think it's $35 a year here in Canada to subscribe to it, and that thing goes live on my iPad right as I sit down to watch qualifying, practice, the race, whatever it might be. And it's great. To me, it brings me closer to the event. It brings me closer into the race. It's really cool to be able to watch the sector times and to be able to see, how two drivers are matching up, and just to see the gaps that are there. Because I mean, they do a good job on TV, but of course, the information kind of comes in little bits and pieces. But it's nice just to have that one timing screen. But anyways, they completely changed it up. And there was an outroar after that race on social media. And to their credit, they backtracked and basically rebooted the timing app, and they had two separate ones for the remainder of the year. I know there is some plan that they kind of want to go back to the one that didn't really go over that popularly, but who knows? I mean, it didn't go well, and they could have just not said anything, honestly, and just kind of just decided this is how we're going to do it. If you don't like it, well, too damn bad. And that's what they didn't do. They actually listened to the fans and backtracked and did what they needed to do and reinstated it. So hopefully the new version 2.0, however, if they release that this year, hopefully they've taken a lot of that criticism and what they've learned and put that into effect to make sure that whatever they do in the future is a lot better thought out and a lot better implemented. So you're not going to upset your fans that are like splashing out a bit of money to do it. But the other thing is too that they're saying that the new races should not be introduced to the detriment of the old races. And this has been one thing that Chase Carey and Liberty Media have been talking about for a very long time, that they want these historical races in Formula One. They're a priority for them. And you have Silverstone. They're not happy, but you have Monza that's not really been I'd say in the safest of hands the past couple of years. And just talking about that, Silverstone is one of 5 circuits this year that they're out of contract this year. The other one is Hockenheim, which has been a little bit hit and miss. I mean, we did have a German Grand Prix the other year, and to me that just is mind blowing. Monza is out of contract this year. Barcelona, the Spanish Grand Prix in Mexico City. So that's 5 this year. Now, apparently they said a couple of was about a month or two ago that there's up to like 40 cities or venues worldwide that have expressed interest in Formula One. Okay, that's great. But to me, no British Grand Prix, no German Grand Prix, no Italian Grand Prix, or even the Spanish Grand Prix. I mean, those are just like I say, it's mind-blowing to conceive Formula One without them. I mean, I'm open to the discussion about Hockenheim itself, because although the old track, I guess, was kind of iconic, it really was from another era of motor racing, where basically the cars would just come into that stadium section, they'd hit that right-hander, and then they'd disappear into the woods for a couple of minutes. And of course, in this day and age, you have to consider safety and all those sorts of things. And of course, tragically, Jim Clark was killed there in the 1960s in a Formula 2 race. So it made a lot of sense. I'm just not too crazy about the layout of the new Hockenheim. I've been to both Hockenheim and the Nürburgring for Formula One, and also for DTM. They're both great tracks, and well, honestly, if I was to pick between the two of them, I'd probably go with the Nürburgring, but hey, that's just me. The point is that Formula One needs all these historic tracks, as many as they can get, because, I mean, Monza's another one. To me, it just seems inconceivable to have a Formula One season without Monza and the atmosphere, the tifosi there, and each and every year you have all these thousands of fans on the pit straight afterwards to celebrate the top three drivers when they go up onto the podium there, all the banners, all the flags, all that really cool stuff. And it's more than just an event. In Silverstone as well, it's been one of the best attended races for the past couple of years. I mean, the British fans love Lewis Hamilton, they love motorsport, and Silverstone, although I've never been there for a Formula One race, I hear it's horrible to get to in and out. The access is very difficult, yet they turn out in their hundreds of thousands. I mean, do you really want to lose out on all those fans? I mean, because that is a really good advertisement for your sport compared to some of these other tracks where it's a struggle to get people into attendance. I mean, you look at Malaysia, they had the big stadiums and or big grandstands that were sparsely filled with motor racing fans, but it's true, but they have to find a way to either restructure these deals for these existing tracks, or give them, I think, a more favorable deal moving forward if they're going to renegotiate, and not necessarily, they can't go out and get these new races in like Vietnam, which is going to come in, was it in 2020? I mean, it looks really cool, and Vietnam is an emerging economy, and a very, Hanoi is a very vibrant city, so it makes sense to try out going to new places like that, and the track looks like it's going to be really cool. Miami looked like it was on as well, until local opposition has kind of put that on the back burner, perhaps for good. But while they're exploring these new venues, they can't make it too good of a deal for them, to the point where it's really affecting the other circuits, to the point of like, well, why should we have to pay through the nose? And these other cities, these other venues are getting a pretty sweet deal. Like, if I think it was Azerbaijan, I think maybe Russia too, they pay among the highest fees to host a Grand Prix, compared to Monaco, who pay relatively little because of their historic status. Very much like how Ferrari gets a bit of a special deal because their historic status, as well as being in Formula One for over 50 years, and all their achievements in the sport as well. So you can understand these comments that they're making, but I do find it's interesting that it wasn't unanimous. It was only 16 of the 21 races, and then subsequently you've had promoters from both Russia and Mexico distance themselves a little bit from the criticism that have been leveled and pointed towards Liberty Media and Formula One. So the other races, the other promoters that weren't included, besides Mexico and Russia, were Abu Dhabi, Bahrain, Monaco, and Japan. And Monaco, well, I mean, basically they understood it, but the promoter from the Russian Grand Prix, he was a little bit more blunt about it, a little bit more to the point. But you can understand why there's frustration, and you can see why the promoters are also a little bit concerned as well, because they have, as much as they went and pushed through these rules for 2019 with the simplified front wings and the barge boards and all that, the longer term vision for 2021 and beyond is still It's vague at best, right? Ross Brawn was talking about it a couple of weeks ago that he's frustrated that although the meetings and the consultations that they've had with the teams and other stakeholders in recent months have been very positive, and there seems like a desire to get it done. He's dissatisfied with the amount of time that it's taking. So if he's dissatisfied with it, you can understand why people otherwhere in the sport would be a little bit upset about that as well. But definitely very interesting to see that not all of them would be on board, or not necessarily on board, but definitely it's not a unanimous thing that they're all unhappy with the direction of the sport. And of course, it's going to take time to give a little bit of a benefit of the doubt to Liberty, that they're not going to change it overnight. I mean, Bernie did things the way that he did. There was not so much in his era with the social media. There wasn't really all that much in the way of marketing. I mean, they brought in Ross Brawn and Sean Bratches to really help out and really modernize Formula One, both from a commercial side and from a sporting side. So they know what they're doing from that point, but it's going to take a little bit of time to get it sorted out. I do think that they've done a lot of positive things. But of course, the jury's going to be out to a certain extent. And of course, we'll only really be able to pass judgment after all these things are implemented or not. And after a couple of years, we'll be able to sit back and say, well, they took over Formula One. They got rid of Bernie and his establishment. And are we in a better position now, 4 or 5 years down the road or whatever it might be, than we were under Bernie Ecclestone? So great question. But a little bit related to that is that there is talk this week that they would like to, or not like, the direct quote is that Formula One would love to add a second race in China. Of course, they've been at Shanghai since 2004, and the Chinese Grand Prix this year will be the 1,000th. Get that. The 1,000th Grand Prix in Formula One since 1950. And, well, you can understand why. I mean, China's got the biggest population in the world. It's a very big economy, and it's the second largest economy in the world, and it's a key place for car manufacturers. And, take your pick. I mean, Shanghai is obviously a world city, great place, and you could see why maybe some of the other race promoters would be concerned if they're looking into having another race in China and maybe giving them a bit of preferential treatment. I'm sure that wouldn't be the case, but it's definitely not the only place that's been mentioned. London was out there a couple of weeks ago, just before Christmas, and the London mayor was saying that it's a real possibility that we could see a race take place there. But certainly you can understand why Liberty would want to have a race in China, and also a second race in the United States. I think that the Circuit of Americas is a really good venue, like the track, and but you can understand too why they would be interested to having a second U.S. Grand Prix, for example, be it in Miami, which obviously looks like it's not going to happen anytime soon, but New York, Vegas has been thrown out there. I mean, there's so many great places that you could pick in the United States. And of course, I mean, it's a car culture. The Americans love cars. They love racing. So again, it's also a very wealthy country. It's got a huge population with the population of the United States. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm guessing it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 350 million people. I'm sure there's quite a few of Formula One fans. I mean, definitely from this podcast point of view, our biggest audience, our listeners are in the U.S. So kind of extrapolate from that if you want. So who knows? We could see maybe a race in Beijing. That makes sense. It'd be kind of cool to see the Formula One racing around the Forbidden City, but definitely a case of watch this space. Anyways, let's talk a little bit now, sort of a semi-related topic, and just some of the 2019 rule changes that are coming up, and of course the big ones that everybody's been talking about are the front wings, the simplified barge boards, which are intended to clean up the airflow behind the car and make it more possible for other cars to get closer and hopefully increase the opportunities for more overtaking during the course of a Grand Prix. But there are a number of other things that are changing this year. The first one is the fuel limit is going up. There's help for the heavier drivers, which I think a lot of us here are going to kind of chuckle at, because I don't think heavy drivers are what we kind of think when we see these very lean and toned Formula One drivers. But it's true. I mean, I can't remember what it was, what he weighed, but back in the day, Gerhard Berger, I think he weighed something like 85 kilos. So not really a lot, but every pound, of course, does make a difference in Formula One. But in the past, it was the total weight of car included the driver, and so it helps that if that was the case, that your driver was as light as possible. But this year, the weight of the driver in his seat will be measured at the start of the year, and it must hit a minimum of 80 kilograms. Sorry, and any driver that falls under that limit will have ballast fitted inside the cockpit area to compensate. Now, I don't know how much a seat in Formula One weighs for a Formula One car. Being space age material, I can imagine it probably isn't very much, but still 80 kilograms, multiply that by 2.2 to convert into pounds. That's still not very a lot. That's not really a lot, of course, but I think that's kind of a cool way to do it, right? And put ballast in it, kind of make everybody start from the same thing. So kind of a cool one. I like the idea that they're going to tweak the grid penalties, because it was kind of ridiculous. I mean, as cool as these hybrid turbo V6 engines have been, just the fact that we've seen people replacing entire engines or MGU-Ks or MGU-Hs, all these different pieces that go in the car or on the engine. I mean, it was ridiculous at some point. I mean, you'd see cars racking up grid penalties that were like in 25, 50, 100 spots in some cases. It was absolutely ridiculous. But they're going to be, this year, what they're going to do is they're going to be starting by placing them in the back of the grid in the order that they qualify. And then there's also going to be something as well with the drivers which we don't see very much in this day and age, who qualify outside of the 107% rule, will be allowed to start at the back of the grid behind any drivers that have power unit penalties. So kind of cool there. And also this is no surprise, new oil burn limits. There was that was something that was kind of implemented last year, because this year, they're not going to be able to have any oil in their auxiliary oil tanks for qualifying, all to do with like that party mode, and burning oil is just another way that they can get more performance out of the cars, and that was a bit of a holdover from last year. There's going to be new safety car rules that compared to previous years, where they were not allowed to pass from behind or until they passed the safety car line, which was typically a couple of corners before the start-finish line. This year, cars won't be able to overtake until they pass the start-finish, so that's kind of cool. And then just even stuff off of the track that they're going to do is that they don't, this year, they're going to be allowed to have up to, I think it's 6 trainees that can have exemptions, because they're only allowed to have 60 people in the pits on the during a race weekend. And I think that each trainee is allowed 2 times a year that they can get an exemption and be there. So I think that's cool. I think that's definitely a way to get more of these brilliant young engineers, these men and women, exposed to Formula One. So I think that's kind of cool. Another one which is interesting is that the teams are going to scrutineer themselves, and basically they have to sign a declaration that their cars comply with all the regulations. So it's not like they're just it's like the honor system after the events, the race is over. There's still going to be all the usual post-session checks done by the scrutineers, but there is, at least before they get on the track, that the teams will have filled out this declaration saying, yep, we're good, we're in compliance with all the rules and regulations, and if they found out to be in breach of that, well, you're going to get nailed for it. And then also cars that start in the pit lane this year, they will be able to basically follow the field around after the very last car crosses or passes the pits on the start or on the formation lap, and they too will be able to go around rather than just kind of waiting there until the race starts. So I think that's kind of good. Also, this year we're going to see the different helmets, which have been developed over a really, really long period of time, and basically it just makes the opening on the front of the helmet a lot smaller to prevent an incident like we saw with Felipe Massa at Hungary. Was about 10 years ago, when that spring came off and actually went in through his visor and injured him rather badly. And then, finally, we're going to see a checkered light rather than a checkered flag, because in Canada last year, we saw the checkered flag was waved by supermodel Winnie Harlow, and there was just a little bit of a miscalculation. The checker flag was waved a little bit early, and of course there is safety concerns for that. So the checkered flag will still be used, but it will be on one of those LED boards that you see around the tracks. That once you see the checkered flag waving on that means the session's over, the race is done, and hopefully we won't have, we won't have any repeats of a premature checkered flag like we did last year. But just talking about a little bit more just about some of the changes from last year, Dr. Helmut Marko, the big wig over at Red Bull Racing, he believes that, or he doesn't believe, he knows that the changes to the front wing rule has already cost Red Bull 15 million euros. And despite a lot of the issues that they had developing this front wing, he says that they've already recovered most of the loss of performance that was caused by these front wings that they're going to run this year. But 15 million euros, wow! I know that it was a big thing for them to talk about. I mean, Racing Point, their technical director, was just talking about the other week that it sounds like a very small thing, and it basically had the effect, probably unintended, I'm sure, that just changing those front wings was almost tantamount to redesigning the entire car, just because of all the effects that it had elsewhere. So that is a really, really huge amount of money. 15 million euros for Red Bull Racing alone just to get this taken care of and implemented for this year. Now, talking about another team, and Frederick Vassar, the team principal at Sauber, says that top teams, not the midfield teams, are Sauber's reference points. I love the talk. I love the swagger. I really like the direction that Sauber is going in. And of course, they had a great driver last year in Charles Leclerc. They had a much improved car compared to the past couple of years. Obviously, the big thing there was they actually had an engine that was designed to go with the car that they were going with, because 2017, they had a car that was built to the 2017 regulations, but was powered by an engine that went into the previous version, the previous era of Formula One cars in 2016, and it just didn't deliver the grunt. But Vasseur came in about a year and a half, 2 years ago, after they parted ways with Manisha Kaltenborn, and the team's really turned around. I mean, they've got that, they've had Ferrari engines for a while, but they've got that Alfa Romeo sponsorship, and they're definitely going in the right direction. And I love to see the confidence, almost a little bit of cockiness to say that, we're not just measuring ourselves against the guys that we're racing with, we're measuring ourselves against the big boys, and that's where we want to be. And I'd like to see them punch above their weight. I mean, we've seen teams like Force India over the past, quite a few number of years outperform and do better than is really expected, just because they're so ingenuitive and so flexible and just able to work or really deliver more than you would expect that they're capable of, considering the budget that they have on or that they have to work with. And if Sauber is able to do the same, and if they're able to push their way up and become, I don't want to really say the best of the rest, because that's a bit of the, I think it's a little bit, I wouldn't say insulting, but it really isn't giving them their credit. I mean, you always want to go out there to Formula One, because I don't think there are too many teams that just show up and say, hey, we're just happy to be here. We don't really care if we're going to win a race or not. We're in Formula One. We're just going to drive around and do whatever. I mean, the goal obviously always has to be to win. Whether or not you're going to have a realistic shot to win each and every weekend, that's a completely different story, of course, but really cool to see. And I mean, it's going to be fun to watch, seeing what Kimi Räikkönen is going to do, going back to the team where he started his Formula One career, 20 years ago or whatever it is now. And it's also going to be interesting to watch Antonio Giovinazzi, who drove a couple of races for them 2 years ago when Pascal Wehrlein was out with that recovering from concussion or whatever it was after he injured himself in that in the Race of Champions that year. So it's going to be interesting to watch on a number of fronts, but definitely I love it. I love the comments. I like guys that have confidence. Now, talking about guys that have confidence, Carlos Sainz, he's really throwing some love in former teammate Nico Hülkenberg's direction. And he says that he believes that the Hulk would win straight away if he was in a top Formula One team like Ferrari, Red Bull, or Mercedes, because Nico has been in Formula One. I think he's got about 150-something races under his belt, but he hasn't even been on a podium yet. And this is a guy that's won Le Mans. I think he won there in 2015, I think, if I remember correctly. But he won what is being called the Class B, the best of the rest. So he would have finished 7th in the World Championship behind the Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes drivers. And I think that's an interesting comment because you got obviously a lot of the focus is going to go on Danny Ricciardo going there to Renault, and rightfully so. I mean, Ricciardo's won about 7 or 8 Grand Prix now, if I remember off the top of my head, and Renault have paid a lot of money to, given him a very big contract to go there. So obviously he's going to be the guy, but again, as interesting as it's going to be to watch situations like Valtteri Bottas and how he does at Mercedes and how he measures up against Lewis Hamilton, and of course the whole Sebastian Vettel and Charles Leclerc thing going on at Ferrari. It's going to be interesting too to see what happens at Renault, but definitely it's really interesting to see what Carlos Sainz is saying about Hülkenberg, and I think it's a real compliment anytime that one of your peers or one of your colleagues really has something something like that to say about what you do and what you're capable of, and the fact that Sainz believes that Hülkenberg is underrated and doesn't necessarily get the recognition that he deserves. So again, Renault, I think that I know that they're not happy from where they were last year. They really weren't as far forward as they were hoping to really progress last year. They kind of plateaued a bit. I mean, we've seen them progress and improve each and every year since they took over Lotus after, 2014 or 2015. Fair enough. It's going to take a while to turn it around, but this year that curve, that upward curve that they were on, leveled off a little bit, and for the most part, I think it's not unfair at all to say that they plateaued in 2018. So they've been saying, Cyril Abiteboul is the team principal, has been saying that they've really made a lot of gains over the off season. But hey, everybody says that in January, and it doesn't really mean anything until you get on the track in Melbourne and line up against those 18 other cars and really see, we improved a lot, but everybody else improved that much more than we did, or maybe they don't. So of course, we'll wait and see. But certainly, if Renault is able to improve, it could be fun to see what these guys are able to do, and Ricciardo and Nico Hülkenberg are able to do in Formula One this year. And I think after Ricciardo had announced that he was going to go to Renault for 2019, I think Hülkenberg had put something. I was either on Instagram or Twitter, whatever it was, something like, "Oh, looking forward to going hunting with you next year, bro," or something like that. So could be a really fun partnership to watch. And I think this year maybe more than most years in the past, just because of all the amounts of changes that we've seen. The drivers going all over the place, and really the silly season in 2018 was a lot sillier than most years. But just all the changes and the different partnerships that are going to be out there, and some of the new faces that are in Formula One, and some of the ones that aren't there anymore, definitely could make it a fun year to watch. But one guy that's not going to be having fun in Formula One next year is Brendan Hartley, who is out at Toro Rosso, and that wasn't really any surprise. But he was saying that, he kind of dished out some of the dirt and the inside story on how that unfolded, but he was saying that it really started as early as Monaco last year. And Monaco, of course, is usually it's usually about Indy, so the end of May, beginning of June there. And of course, that's obviously when it started, because that's when Franz Tost and Toro Rosso were approaching McLaren about signing Lando Norris on it was basically on a loan deal, basically, to get him in a Toro Rosso for the remainder of 2018 and all of 2019. And you could understand why Hartley would be upset about it. I mean, he's basically only got a handful of races under his belt for the team, and they're already talking about replacing him with a guy that, doesn't have any Formula One experience. I know the Lando is really highly touted, and obviously that whole situation really lit a fire under Zach Brown and McLaren to do something about that. And of course, Lando's going to be driving for McLaren next year, but I don't think it's really going to make you feel all that great. Regardless, I mean, professional sports obviously is it's what have you done for me lately kind of attitude, and that's to be expected. I mean, it's the pinnacle of motorsports, or so supposedly it is. So that definitely is going to be exacerbated or amplified to a certain extent. That if you haven't you're not performing, then that's going to be an issue. I mean, Hartley had success outside of Formula One, and they did struggle. I mean, they had a very good start to the year. I mean, Pierre Gasly, he had a phenomenal race, finishing, fourth at Bahrain last year, and that's one of the first races of the year, but they really cooled off after that. And I know that they did a lot really to help develop the Honda engine, and they suffered because of that in certain situations to help the senior Red Bull team. And you can expect that, of course, but Hartley obviously a little bit disappointed, a little bit sour on the way that went down, and certainly I don't think any of us would really want to find out that our job is potentially in danger, literally the first couple of months into a new gig like that. But I'm sure he'll be all right. I know he's disappointed. I mean, what else am I going to say? And finally tonight, talking about guys that are no longer in Formula One, and Fernando Alonso has secured a win at the Daytona 24 Hours. And so that's really cool. I mean, that's the Rolex 24 Hours, and that's just another one of those races that he's won, and he's adding to his list of accomplishments outside of Formula One. So he joined teammates Jordan Taylor, Renger van der Zande, and Kamui Kobayashi in the number 10 Wayne Taylor Racing Cadillac, taking the overall victory in the DPI class. So the race was actually plagued by some very, very heavy rainstorms at about 5 o'clock in the morning, and they actually stopped the race because of heavy rain with over 2 hours left to run. But very cool. I mean, it's good to see Fernando. I mean, he still loves racing, and obviously his options in Formula One were limited. I mean, love him or hate him, I mean, Fernando was he just kind of marched to the beat of his own drum, and I think unfortunately he did burn bridges in Formula One, but McLaren seemed to love him. I mean, it sounds for all intents and purposes like a retirement, very much like Jenson Button did when he said he kind of left the door open when he retired a couple of years ago. But apart from that one-off when he came back at Monaco, when Alonso coincidentally was racing at Indy in 2017, that was basically it. Whether or not Fernando comes back to Formula One in a year or two, if McLaren get more competitive, that remains to be seen, but certainly he's going to focus now. I would think he's going to be looking towards Indy, because that's the third leg of the unofficial Triple Crown of motorsports. He's already won Le Mans, which he did earlier this year. He's already won Monaco, so all he has to do is win Indy. And when he was there in 2017, I mean, he did great. He did very, very good during qualifying. I was impressed watching him during the race, and ironically, it was his Honda engine which blew up. He must have been cursing his luck on that day, because not only was the Honda power plaguing him in Formula One, it was also bothering him at Indy. But be that as it may, Fernando did have a very, very good debut at Indy, so that's, you would think that would have to be his focus. And let's just throw this out there right now. If he does actually win at Indy in 2019, what then? What is there left to prove? If you've won a Formula One World Championship, you've won Le Mans, you've won Monaco, you've done all these things. Do you keep going? I mean, Fernando, he's getting up there in terms of professional athlete years, but still obviously a very young man, and you have to wonder if he actually pulls it off, what is there left to do? Anyways, food for thought. Anyways, that's a good place to leave it for this week. Thank you all very much for downloading and listening to the show. If you like the show, and you can do us a favor by sharing it with a friend or leaving us a 5-star review and a rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcasts and listen to them. We'd very much appreciate it. And if you have any comments or any questions, you can throw a tweet my way at Scuderia F1 Pod on Twitter, or you can email me at scuderiaf1pod@gmail.com. That's it. That's a wrap. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll talk to you again this time next week.
Thanks for listening to the Scuderia F1 podcast. If you want to get the show notes for this episode, then head over to scuderiaf1pod.com. Want to get in touch with us? Then email us at scuderiaf1pod@gmail.com.
You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.